There are moments in political hearings when you can tell almost immediately that the person speaking isn't interested in giving you the usual polished Washington answer. And this exchange goes straight after one of the most explosive issues in American politics: the southern border, illegal immigration, cartel activity, human trafficking, and the responsibility of the federal government. The speaker doesn't just criticize the Biden administration's border policies. He argues that Americans are being shielded from the real consequences of those policies. And then he brings up migrant deaths, children allegedly exploited by cartels, sex trafficking, and even the mysterious wristbands found along the Rio Grande. And by the end, he's making a very serious accusation against not only politicians, but the media itself. Welcome back to the Political Brief. If you want political commentary that doesn't shy away from the biggest debates in Washington, make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, and tell me what you think in the comments. Because this hearing raises some uncomfortable questions, and we're going to break them down. Now, let's get into it.
We're facing an unmitigated disaster at our southern border. Illegal immigration is the worst in our nation's history, and it's indefensible. All of us have been down to the southern border. I spend a lot of time on our southern border. John Cornyn and I together brought 19 senators down to the border to see firsthand. You cannot see what is happening there and defend it. One of my recent trips to the border, a reporter asked me, said, "Aren't the policies of Democrats more compassionate, more humane than you mean Republicans?" And I just started laughing. I said, "You know who doesn't believe that anymore? Democrats. Where's Joe Biden? Where's Kamala Harris? Where's even a single Democrat senator? Where's AOC? I assume she still has her white pantsuit. She just can't be bothered to cry in front of the Biden cages. Because with Trump no longer in the White House, suddenly the suffering of those kids doesn't matter. You cannot see what is happening and defend it. And by the way, the reason Biden doesn't go to the border, the reason Kamala Harris and other Democrats don't go to the border, because if they did, y'all would follow. The press would follow. And their only defense, they cannot defend what they're doing. Their only defense is to cover it up. Karine Jean-Pierre stands at the White House podium and says, people are not just walking across the border. It's not happening. There's a technical legal term for what that is. That's called bullshit. It is an utter and complete lie. It is a deliberate lie. It is a known lie. And she is lying on behalf of the President of the United States in the White House. Now, why does she lie? She lies because she counts on the press not to call her out. Was there a PolitiFact, a pants on fire done on that? No. I've invited the White House press secretary, come with me to the southern border any day and pick any hour of the day. We'll go out in 1 hour, and I guarantee you we will encounter group after group after group. You want to know how bad it is? We're now seeing Democrat mayors, Democrat governors, mayors like Eric Adams, the Democrat in New York, who says illegal immigration is destroying New York City. That's with 110,000 illegal immigrants in New York City. If 110,000 is destroying New York City, what in the hell do you think 7.6 million is doing to the state of Texas and the other states along our southern border? Now, these Democrats who are saying this, they can't quite muster up the strength to put the blame where it lies, which is at the feet of Democrats who are doing this deliberately. Instead, Mayor Adams blames, quote, that madman down in Texas, by which he means Greg Abbott. I have to admit, I was kind of offended he wasn't referring to me. But he blames Greg Abbott for putting a few thousand illegal immigrants on buses and sending them to New York City. The person who caused this crisis, his name is Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. His home address is 16 blocks away. And by the way, if Eric Adams wants some help fixing this problem, he can pick up the phone and call someone else named Charles Schumer. He's a New York resident. I believe he lives in Manhattan. If the mayor doesn't have his number, we can give him Chuck Schumer's cell phone. Because Chuck Schumer is responsible, in the words of the New York mayor, for destroying New York City. Look, some of y'all may have seen when Alejandro Mayorkas testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I asked him, I said, Mr. Secretary, how many migrants died last year crossing illegally? He said, I don't know, I have no idea. I said, of course you don't. The official numbers are 853, but you don't care about those dead bodies that appear in Texas every single day. I asked him how many children were brutalized by human traffickers. He said, I don't know. How many women were sexually assaulted? I don't know. How many people died of drug overdoses? As John Cornyn told you, it's more than 100,000. And you want to talk about something stunning? I put up a photograph with pictures of colored wristbands. I said, Mr. Secretary, what are these wristbands? And he said, I have no idea what they are. Now look, any good lawyer will tell you, you don't ask a question you don't know the answer to. That was one answer that left me flabbergasted. Because just about every single illegal immigrant who crosses the border wears one of those wristbands. They're color-coded for how many thousands of dollars they owe the cartels. And if you stand on the banks of the Rio Grande River, you see hundreds or thousands of these wristbands. They're just like this. These are the wristbands picked up from the banks of the Rio Grande River. And the little boys, the teenagers who come in who owe thousands of dollars to the cartels, they're sent to every city in America, and they're working for the cartels to pay off those thousands of dollars. They're committing crimes in Washington, D.C., and New York, in every city in America. And if they don't pay off the cartels, their families will be murdered. And as bad as the boys have it, the girls have it even worse. There are literally thousands upon thousands of girls trapped in sex slavery to pay off their debts to the cartels. When I look at these are modern-day leg irons. This is human slavery. And it is caused by the Democrats not giving a damn about the people being abused. And so I want to make a plea to the press. The reason the Democrats can do this, can look the other way, is because they're confident that the corporate media will not report on it, that they'll never have to answer questions about it. They'll never be confronted with the dead bodies, with the people being brutalized by these policies. So I want to make a plea to you. If you're not writing on it, if you're not running stories on it, if you're not telling what's happening, you are complicit in modern-day slavery. This is indefensible. It's evil.
Right away, the speaker describes the situation at the southern border as an unmitigated disaster. And from a conservative perspective, I think it's important to start with something that should not even be controversial. A country has the right to control its own borders. That's not an extreme position. That's sovereignty. America can have a generous immigration system. America can welcome people fleeing persecution. America can accept legal immigrants who want to build a better life. But there still has to be a functioning legal process. And when large numbers of people are crossing illegally, Americans have every right to ask whether the federal government is actually enforcing the laws that are already on the books. The speaker then makes an interesting point about the argument that Democrats have historically presented their immigration policies as more compassionate and humane. His response is essentially, if these policies are so compassionate, why are people dying on the journey? Why are people being exploited by smugglers? Why are criminal organizations profiting from desperate migrants? And that's where I think conservatives have a legitimate question. Because compassion isn't just about intentions. It's about consequences. If someone is putting their life in the hands of cartel because they believe that's their only path into America, we have to ask whether the system itself is creating incentives for dangerous behavior. And let's be clear about something. The migrant isn't necessarily the villain here. A person fleeing poverty or violence isn't automatically a criminal mastermind. A mother carrying her child across a dangerous border isn't the same thing as a cartel smuggler. There are real human beings involved in this. And that's actually one of the reasons I believe conservatives should care so much about border security. Because the people being exploited by cartels are often vulnerable people who have very little power. The speaker then turns his attention toward the Biden administration and specifically argues that senior Democrats weren't doing enough to confront what was happening at the border. He points to Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and other prominent Democrats and essentially asks, where were they? Now, politically, that's a powerful attack. But I think we should be fair here. Simply saying someone didn't visit the border doesn't prove they don't care about the issue. Politicians can address policy without physically standing on the border. However, I do understand a broader argument. When politicians repeatedly tell Americans that their policies are working, they should be willing to go where the consequences of those policies are most visible. If you're confident that your border strategy is succeeding, why not show Americans what success looks like? That's a reasonable challenge. Then the speaker goes after the White House messaging surrounding illegal crossings, accusing officials of denying what was visibly happening. And this is where I think the larger issue becomes trust. If Americans believe government officials aren't telling them the truth, even legitimate statements from those officials start getting questioned. That's incredibly dangerous, because government can't function effectively without some level of public trust. And that applies regardless of political party. If Republicans lie, call them out. If Democrats lie, call them out. If an administration doesn't know the answer, say we don't know. But don't insult the public's intelligence. Now, the clip gets even more interesting when the speaker brings up Democratic politicians dealing with migrant arrivals in their own cities. He specifically points to New York City Mayor Eric Adams and the enormous pressure the migrant influx placed on the city. And here's where I think there's an uncomfortable political reality. For years, immigration was often discussed as if it were primarily a problem for states along the southern border. Then large numbers of migrants began arriving in cities far away from the border. Suddenly, politicians in places like New York had to deal with the practical consequences. Shelter space, housing, healthcare, education, police resources, taxpayer costs. And suddenly the conversation changed. Now, I'm not going to pretend that immigration is responsible for every problem New York City has. That's simply not true. But if a city receives tens of thousands of additional people who need housing and services, it's perfectly reasonable to ask how that city is supposed to handle the additional burden. And if even Democratic officials are warning that the situation is overwhelming their resources, Washington needs to pay attention. The speaker then brings up Alejandro Mayorkas and questions him about the number of migrants who died attempting to cross the border. According to the exchange, Mayorkas didn't have the number available. And this is where I think the criticism becomes understandable. I'm not saying a cabinet secretary has to memorize every statistic. But if you're appearing before Congress to defend the government's border policies, you should be prepared to discuss the human consequences of those policies. How many people died? How many children were trafficked? How many people were assaulted? How many Americans died from drugs entering through the border? What are the actual numbers? What is the government doing about it? Those are not unfair questions. Those are exactly the questions government officials should be prepared to answer. Then comes the part that really caught my attention, the wristbands. The speaker holds up photographs of color-coded wristbands and claims that they're used by cartels to track debts owed by migrants. He argues that migrants can become indebted to criminal organizations that help facilitate their journey, and that this debt can leave vulnerable people exposed to exploitation. Now, I want to make an important distinction here. We shouldn't automatically treat every claim made during a political hearing as established fact. The specific purpose and meaning of these wristbands should be independently verified before anyone presents the claim as definitive. But the underlying issue is absolutely real. Cartels exploit vulnerable people. Human trafficking is real. Smuggling networks are real. Sexual exploitation is real. And desperate people can become extremely profitable targets for organized crime. That's what makes the border issue so complicated. You can simultaneously believe that illegal immigration needs to be reduced while also believing that migrants themselves deserve humane treatment. Those positions aren't contradictory. In fact, I think they're connected. If you want to reduce human trafficking, one of the things you should want is to reduce the power of criminal organizations controlling illegal migration routes. If you want fewer people dying in the desert or rivers, you should want fewer people attempting dangerous illegal crossings. If you want fewer children being exploited, you should want to dismantle the networks that profit from moving vulnerable people across borders. And if you want to reduce cartel power, you need a serious border strategy. That's why I reject the idea that border security automatically means being anti-immigrant. It doesn't. You can support legal immigration and still oppose illegal entry. You can believe America should welcome people while also believing that there must be an orderly process for entering the country. Those aren't radical ideas. They're basic governance. And then the speaker turns his fire toward the media. He argues that politicians can avoid accountability because the press isn't asking enough difficult questions. Now, I wouldn't go as far as saying every journalist is deliberately covering up what's happening. There are journalists doing serious reporting on immigration, border security, trafficking, and cartel activity. But I absolutely believe the media has a responsibility to hold both parties accountable. If a Republican administration fails, report it. If a Democratic administration fails, report it. If a Republican governor makes a mistake, investigate it. If a Democratic mayor makes a mistake, investigate it. That's journalism. The problem is that political media has become increasingly tribal. Too many people don't want information. They want confirmation. They don't ask, what's true? They ask, what does my side say? And that's a terrible way to run a democracy. Because sometimes your side is wrong. And if you care about America more than you care about a political party, you should be willing to admit it. But on the central issue here, I think the conservative argument remains incredibly strong. The federal government has a responsibility to enforce immigration law and secure the border. That doesn't mean treating migrants like they're criminals simply because they're migrants. It means having a system where the government actually knows who is entering the country, why they're entering, and whether they qualify to remain. It means processing legitimate asylum claims. It means deporting people who have no legal basis to remain. It means targeting cartel leaders and human traffickers. And it means protecting the American communities that are affected by an overwhelmed system. Most importantly, it means ending the idea that compassion and enforcement are opposites. They aren't. You can have compassion and enforce the law. You can welcome immigrants and secure the border. You can protect refugees and reject illegal entry. You can fight trafficking and demand stronger immigration enforcement. I actually think that's where a lot of Americans are. They don't hate immigrants. They simply want a country where the laws mean something. And that's what I took away from this hearing. The debate isn't just about Democrats versus Republicans. It's about whether the government is capable of controlling its own immigration system. It's about whether Americans can trust their leaders to give them honest answers. And it's about whether vulnerable migrants are being protected from the criminal organizations that profit from their desperation. Because here's the reality. The cartels don't care about America's political parties. They don't care about Republican talking points. They don't care about Democratic talking points. They care about money. And whenever there's chaos, criminals look for opportunities. So if Washington is serious about solving this, enough with the endless political theater. Secure the border. Fix the legal immigration system. Speed up asylum processing. Target traffickers. Destroy cartel operations. Support border agents. And hold government officials accountable when they fail. That's what I want to see. Not another 10 years of politicians standing behind microphones telling us that everything is under control while communities on the ground tell us otherwise. And I think that's ultimately the question this hearing leaves us with. Can America have a compassionate immigration system without having an uncontrolled border? I believe the answer is yes. But it requires something Washington has been missing for far too long: enforcement, accountability, and political courage. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think the federal government failed to take the border crisis seriously enough? Or do you think the criticism in this hearing goes too far? And what do you think should happen next? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more political reactions and conservative commentary here on The Political Brief, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and share this video. Because this debate isn't going away, and Americans deserve to have it.